meet the Mets. Step right up and greet
And how you doing? How you living? How you feeling, folks? Back for another episode of City Night Lights. Now, of course, I'm your host. My name's Zach, and as always, I'm glad to be back. I'm your idiot number 0. And, getting back into some Mets conversation. Been a slow few weeks, didn't really feel the need to single out the Jorge Polanco or Luke Weaver signing for any specific episode. But, we're going to cover some of that today, go over a little bit of the acquisitions, a new trade that just recently happened with the Mets, I want to say within the last 48 hours. And then maybe, what's to come? What should we expect at this point? Because clearly this MLB offseason has been anything but what Met fans expected. Now, with that being said, we're just going to get right into this bad boy, and we'll start with the Jorge Polanco signing. It's been about 2 weeks since we signed him, and definitely feel a little better since I let the emotions settle. Now, clearly, this is not a Pete Alonso replacement. In no way, form, shape, or really any. There's no possibility of replacing Pete Alonso this free agency. That just wasn't possible. There's no guy who's going to come out here and perennially hit you 40 home runs. It just doesn't happen. So Jorge Polanco is more or less going to be our Brandon Nimmo type of guy replacement. In the last few seasons, he's averaging about a 115 OPS plus, so he's about 15% better than your average hitter. Last year, he played phenomenally in a rather non-hitter-friendly park up in Seattle. Had his best season. He had 26 home runs, 78 ribbies, and batted .260 with a 134 OPS plus. Did that in Seattle. On top of that, did that for a winning team that went to the playoffs and had a fun ride. But I think this could be an interesting acquisition for us. Obviously, he's going to take over more of that DH role. It does seem like he's going to have some flexibility to play third, and rumored is that he's going to be more or less getting a lot of time at first base. Now, he's never played first base before. He's played second, he's played third, and he's kind of gotten accustomed to that DH role. I might see him, get flexed out to third a day here and there. Maybe if Marcus Semien needs a day off, they flex him out to third, Beatty over to second, and then maybe we get a platoon first baseman. I don't know. There's a lot of moves that still have yet to be made in order to figure out exactly how this Polanco signing is going to go, but I don't necessarily hate it. He's a great bat. Get him 2 years, $40 million. It's relatively cheap. Not really going to put a dent in your payroll at all. He could be a fun player for us. I really just hope to see him more in a DH role than anything else. It'd be cool to have a true DH. This would probably be the first time since the DH position has really been instilled in both the AL and NL that the Mets would have a full-time DH. It's just something that they've seemingly neglected year in and year out. Really taking more of the platoon approach, being able to flex guys out to different positions and so they can get in the outfield, give guys breaks and really make that DH role, I guess, more or less a day off, a semi-day off type of deal. But clearly it doesn't seem like they're going to be heading in that direction this year. Contract-wise, 2 years, $40 million, not bad. Doesn't really, as a Mets fan at this point, we got to act like we have the money, but we're just not spending it. If we're going to spend 2 years, 40 on Jorge Polanco, whatever. We'll keep it moving. Our other big signing was Luke Weaver, former Yankees closer. We've been in a very weird role of picking up Yankees closers who have lost the job. It started with Dylan Betances years and years ago, and then, that turned into Clay Holmes, that turned into Devin Williams, Luke Weaver. I mean, it's a little weird. But I'm not going to act like Luke Weaver, by any stretch of the mean, has been a bad pitcher since he's seemingly transitioned from a starter to reliever in his Yankees tenure. He's really been pretty decent the last 2 years. I mean, more or less, he got about a 3.3 ERA through the last 2 seasons. Obviously, we all know that last season, the end of it was an absolute disaster. He fell apart like the last month and a half of the season and really was nowhere to be found in the playoffs. But someone who's had New York success, someone who's comfortable, pitching in New York, I think this goes a long way, helping to rebuild this Mets bullpen. Obviously, it doesn't feel anywhere where it was last year, but I hope to be proven wrong. Luke Weaver, another fastball changeup guy, very occasional slider. I don't know exactly how that's going to work out. Bring in Devin Williams with a very, very similar pitch mix and overall just spread of pitches. So I don't know how to feel about that. I think Luke Weaver will just be an effective bullpen guy, I hope. I really hope that's what this is going to be. Just someone to add more depth to the AJ Minter, Brooks Raley, Devin Williams of it all, right? Just because his pen had so many problems last year, and I think a lot of those problems really stemmed from management. I think Mendoza didn't do a great job of really managing the pen as it needed to be, and led to some issues. And now we have this weird situation where we no longer have Diaz. So Luke Weaver, I'm unbothered by 2 years on a $22 million deal. It seemed like that was the going rate for a reliever of his caliber. Brad Keller ended up getting signed, I want to say, within an hour, give or take, of Luke Weaver signing. So signed an identical deal. I would argue Luke Weaver was the better reliever between the two. So definitely happy about that, Luke Weaver, it doesn't make me feel great, but it doesn't make me feel bad. Kind of same thing with Jorge Polanco, just less of the unknown factor of what else may be done to make me like this better. I don't think there's really anything else to be done to make me like the Luke Weaver signing anymore. But with that being said, we'll move on to the third and final move of the last few weeks. And the Mets have just traded away Jeff McNeil to the Oakland A's, and that was for Yordan Rodriguez. He's a 17-year-old single A, maybe under single A ball guy. Not really any great return. He was just kind of a guy. It seems like the Mets are going to save about $7 to $8 million in this deal. They did pay some of McNeil's next 2 years, but this was more or less just to get him off the team, free up that roster spot, and undo the log jam in the middle infield. Now, I don't hate this move by any stretch of the means. I really did like having Jeff McNeil in the squad for a long time. He was a fun guy, cool dude, but I think with this locker room changing and a lot of things changing with this Mets team, I think it was more than time for Jeff McNeil to go. I mean, really since 2022, every year feels like he's taken a slight step back. Now, last year was definitely a lot better than his 2024 season, but he just really hasn't been that player. We haven't seen him, have a high batting average year again since really 2022. And he's going to be a great player for Oakland. He's going to be able to get a lot of reps, get a lot of time out there. Hell, you might even see him bat 300 in a month, but it's just not the type of fit for the Mets anymore. He still has some of that util ability where he can play first, play in the corners, maybe play a little third, but more likely second. I appreciate having McNeil on this team. He was a fun guy, but I think locker room wise, this might have been a bigger thing than anything else. Obviously, we've heard all offseason about, there were rifts in the Mets locker room between Lindor and Nimmo, McNeil and Lindor, and I think the McNeil one definitely has some traction to it. That's something that we've heard for years at this point, that Lindor and McNeil don't like each other, and there seemingly were constant issues throughout their time together in New York. So I think getting rid of McNeil, getting him out of this locker room, unfortunately was the right decision. And it's not like freeing up this money means anything. It's not like it means we're going to go spend more or, we're reeling in the payroll. It just means they wanted to get rid of McNeil to really more or less free up the logjam and, I guess, pocket a few $1 million while doing it. Now, I think it's important to talk about what's to come here, right? So it's been a weird offseason. I don't think any Met fan would disagree with me there, but it seems clear to me that, all these deals, anything that's happening in Mets free agency / trade land is being held very close to the chest within the organization. Anything that you might see rumored or, whatever, it really might not be more than just a puff of smoke. So just keep that in mind. And it's been very hard to predict. It seems like every move is coming out of left field, and hell, even the moves we don't make are coming out of left field. So it's been a very odd offseason. Now, it does kind of feel like this is going to be a season of letting the kids play, getting Carson Bench / Jet Williams out there into that center field spot / maybe a corner outfield spot. Really giving Brett Beatty that everyday opportunity to play third and maybe a little second, but mostly third. And then maybe this is the Francisco Alvarez breakout year. He's a 24-year-old catcher, been playing for a little bit. He has streaks of unbelievable play. It's just really if we can bring that to a more consistent level, Francisco Alvarez would immediately be a phenomenal catcher and someone that the Mets would really be banking on for some offensive juice this upcoming year, out of the 5-6 spot. Now, there are some guys that I just have no idea about, right? I don't know what's going to happen with Mark Vientos. Is he going to get a first baseman / DH, role? Is that what he's going to become this next season? Are we just really going to see that? Are we going to see Luis Angel Acuna Jr. get traded off this team because, where does he really fit? I don't think there is a spot for a second baseman that really had struggled at the plate. I think, maybe seeing Mark Vientos do that DH first baseman role might be a lot more likely with, this whole letting the kids play mantra that we're seemingly going through outside of second base. And then we have a ton of young pitching as well. I expect to see a lot of young pitching come up. Guys like Christian Scott, who's coming off a TJ, might see him back this year. I would expect to see Jonah Tong if he's not traded, Nolan McLean, Brandon Sprout, another guy if he's not traded, and even Will Watson potentially, someone who's a little further down on the Mets prospect chart, but someone that's been highly talked about, in Mets inner circles. Going to be a lot of young guys. I think that's kind of, it's going to be the name of the game this year. It's just going to be young guys getting in, getting after it, and seeing what's happening. So we'll kind of get into what I think might happen. I know I did this a few episodes ago, but clearly MLB free agency is ever changing, and the Mets situation has changed several times within the last few weeks. So I think it's important to kind of reanalyze what we've gone through, in previous episodes and take another look, see what's going on. So the Bellinger and Tucker thing with the Mets, and we're going to start with outfield. We'll just kind of go position by position. But the Bellinger and Tucker thing feels weird to me. I looked at next offseason, the 2027 free agency period. It doesn't seem like there's any very high-end offensive players that are going to be coming to the dish. Really, the highest-end offensive players are going to be in that 2027 free agency period. Going to be Jazz Chisholm, Randy Arozarena, Seiya Suzuki, and Nico Horner. It's really not a star-studded offensive free agency pool. So I guess if you're going to take your big swing on a guy, you should probably do it now. And in terms of taking a big swing in free agency where, it's not really going to hurt you prospect-wise. You don't have to trade anything. You just get them. You don't have to worry about trying to hammer out a deal. You just have them, and they want to be there. So I could see a potential Tucker or Bellinger deal being made. It doesn't necessarily make me feel comfortable. I think just based on pure age, I like Tucker more just because of the age. I do think Bellinger is probably a better overall corner outfielder. Might last a little bit longer in the field as well. But I guess we'll see what happens. These guys kind of are, the more we sit here and the more they kind of sit in the market with their rumor market being, up and down all over the place. It feels like they're not going to be signed until probably mid-February, and they might get a weird deal. They might get that similar Bregman deal that he got last year, the 3 years, $120 million with an opt-out at the end of each year. I could see a Bellinger or Tucker getting maybe a 3-year, 30 a year contract somewhere in the range of like a 3-year, $100 million deal, and you have opt-outs after maybe the second year or maybe the first year. We'll see how that gets hammered out. But that's really what I think the Bellinger and Tucker market's going to end up becoming, unless there's really a out-of-sight, out-of-mind bidder. Maybe the Blue Jays take a huge swing and they spend a 6-7 year contract on a Bellinger or a Tucker. But I really don't think that these guys are going to get ultra long-term deals. It just doesn't seem to be in play anymore. So intrigued to see how that kind of goes. And we'll keep staying in the outfield. A guy that's been rumored to the Mets for the last, what feels like 2 years, is a Luis Robert Jr. Now, I think if we could get him cheap, it would be well worth it. I mean, I think about it this way, right? He's going to be a guy that you're pretty much paying him a 2-year, $40 million deal. I don't necessarily think he's worth 2 years, $40 million. I mean, I would compare him to more or less a Harrison Bader type player, and Harrison Bader's at least given us offensive success in the last few years versus Bader. There we go. I couldn't look up Harrison Bader's name. But he's at least given us some offensive success in the last few years. Obviously had a phenomenal run with the Phillies. Batting in the 300s, had an OPS plus of 125. He looked great. And even on the Mets, he had a great year. Probably one of his better seasons in a long time. I mean, Harrison Bader's a fun player. He's a great outfielder. But at least in the last 2 years, he's definitely been a better bat than Luis Robert Jr. Now, Robert Jr., the reason why you have to pay him that money is because obviously the White Sox gave it to him. You're more likely going to pick up his option than not, but it's really for the potential that Luis Robert has. In 2023, we saw he had a MVP caliber season, 20 stolen bases, 38 home runs, 38 home runs, 80 runs, batted .264. This is a guy who has a ton of talent. He plays center field very well. He's won a Gold Glove before. He's won a Silver Slugger. He really can be a 5-tool athlete, and maybe, a change of scenery is seemingly what most of the MLB has agreed on, that this guy really needs to get his game back up to the level he thinks he can play at. But I don't know if it's really worth, giving up a Vientos for Luis Robert Jr. It doesn't feel like that would necessarily be equal in trade value. It's been so long since Robert's done anything, to almost 3 years at this point, that it's I would hope that we don't have to give up a top end prospect. Maybe we see a Ronnie Mauricio get dealt for a Luis Robert Jr. That I wouldn't hate. I wouldn't love it, but I wouldn't hate it. I could deal with a Luis Angel Acuna Jr., but especially after this point, after they just signed the Japanese first baseman, I can't remember his name, but they just signed him for 2 years, $38 million. I don't think they really need a first baseman in Mark Vientos. They might be looking for a middle infield or something we have plenty of, even though it's been rumored that they're really looking for pitching. I don't think they get any strong young pitching back for Luis Robert. So if we can get him cheap, I think it's a very, very worthwhile move. But if not, there might be some better options that I'm willing to pay, similar to maybe pay a little bit higher of a price for, rather than Luis Robert Jr. And those two guys, Jared Duran of the Red Sox, a younger outfielder, he's got the speed tool, got the, he's got the fielding tool. He's a good corner outfielder, not really a center field guy, but someone who I would like on this team, plays a good quality small ball game, would really, really help this lineup. And it'd be someone I would expect the Mets to have, batting at 2. I don't know if, what's it called, if you really want Duran batting as your 1, but definitely batting as your 2. Let me just check out his stats real quick. Yeah, he looks great. I mean, last year, a down year. But I think if you have him batting, 1 or 2 in the order, realistically, he could be a lot of fun. He could be really a version of pre-injured Brandon Nimmo, and I think he's got a lot of talent, someone who's been very fun in the league for the last 2 years. And plus, Red Sox also got a jam in the outfield, so they might be looking for some pitching. That is the only kind of stipulation here, is we're going to have to give up pitching for him or a guy like Steven Kwan from the Cleveland Guardians, a dude that's been rumored to be traded. I don't know how realistic Kwan is, but I think Jaron Duran is definitely way more in the realm of possibility of potentially being dealt to the Mets. I could see that, but like I said, there's much to be done this offseason. We'll really see what ends up happening. Now we'll move on to first base. This is something that I think could happen. I don't know how much realism is in it, but regardless, I think it's important to talk about. Maybe the Mets go out and get a guy like Luis Ariz, someone who hits for pure contact. Really hasn't been phenomenal the last 2 years, but plays a decent first base, gets in the field, and just is a guy that you can knock in. He's going to be a guy on the base path, someone who will be there to drive in for a couple runs. Now, he's been great. He's been getting a lot of hits the last few years. Really? Was he traded? Oh, that was 2 years ago. Okay. Sorry, I got confused by Pro Baseball Reference. But, he's batted .292 last year, .314 the year before that. Obviously not a super-duper great OPS plus guy just due to the really pure contact style of baseball he plays, but I wouldn't hate having him on the roster. He's a multi-time Silver Slugger, has been in the MVP conversation before. I mean, I don't think he was ever going to win, but is someone who's had a lot of success just hitting the ball, something that the Mets could use, just someone to put the ball in play, really get this get the game in motion. So maybe they go out and see if they can get a cheap 1 year on a Luis Ariz, help Jorge Polanco make that transition to first over the next 2 years and just be another reliable bat in this lineup. I think that could really help and go a long way for the Mets. It's not something that they're going to have to trade anything for, and I think that'd be a relatively cheap deal. Now, we'll keep it moving. We'll move on to starting pitching. I don't know what they're going to do with starting pitching. I'm really praying we're going to get one. I could also see a potential Kodai Senga deal. I don't know what that would even look like. I couldn't imagine it, but maybe they trade Senga just, to really make this Stearns' team. We've already done that with pretty much all the other long-term non-Stearns guys. I mean, the only one that we haven't done it with yet, I think, is David Peterson, someone that I hope stays around at least until the end of the offseason. But yeah, it feels like they're going to try and get a guy who's signed for 1 year, a guy like Nick Pivetta, someone who's been a name floated around the Mets rumor mill. So I don't know what they're going to do. This is really the one position group I don't know. It feels like as a Met fan, I'm praying they get starting pitching because the starting pitching was such a mess last year, and to not address it, to not get any inclination of any Griffin Canning returning, which would at least make me feel a little better at this point. Like, it's not like that's a great signing, but it's definitely better than what we have. Griffin Canning. I really hope he's still in the Mets. No, he's a free agent. I hope the Mets somehow re-sign him before the season starts. It would just be cool to keep him in the system. He had a great year for us last year before injury. But we'll see what happens with the starting pitching. Now we'll move on to the bullpen. I think similar to that, there might be one more guy signed to this bullpen that's a semi-decent name. But outside of that, I think it's going to be all relatively small, short-term deals that the Mets will be signing out of the bullpen. Nothing really crazy, not a lot more action going on there. I don't think a Pete Fairbanks is in play or anything. So really, I think we're kind of wrapping up our free agency a lot faster than some may have expected. Now, in terms of some popular rumors, I just wanted to float these around. I've heard a lot of rumors about a potential Ketel Marte trade, second baseman for the Arizona Diamondbacks. Now, I just don't know how likely that is. I don't hate bringing another switch hitter into the lineup. It just doesn't feel super realistic to plug him in, to trade a ton for him and then just have another second baseman. Because what do we do with that? At that point, we still got to figure out what we're going to do with. Simeon's going to be our second baseman, but if you bring in Marte, he's never played another position. So you're not putting him at short. You're not putting him anywhere else. Does he become our DH? I don't think Marte makes sense anymore. So I'm going to kind of exclude Marte out of this conversation. We already spoke about Robert and some outfielders. And then another rumor has been rumors about the Padres and a potential trade with the Padres. I don't know what they're talking about. Of course, I'm just an outsider looking in, but it seems like there's been negotiations for several players on the Padres just to see what their prices are. Obviously, the Padres have had some ownership issues after Peter Sadler, their previous owner, died. Since the family has taken it over, they're trying to really gut the team in terms of spending. So maybe the Mets are able to go out there and pick up some high-end contracts. I know, a piece that I was just playing around with, I don't know how realistic it is, but would be to go out and get Tatis Jr. Obviously that would fit the Mets lineup very well. They need to bring in another guy, especially in the corner outfield. You'd be bringing in an absolute stud, 5-tool athlete. On top of that, you got the prospect capital to pay because you're going to have to pay up for him. I could see it being like a Jonathan, Will Watson, and maybe a Vientos or a Jet Williams type of deal to get this done. And those are just, I think that's a good starting place. Maybe you also throw back a Tyrone Taylor just to make the actual roster size work out. But I think that would be a smart move for the Mets to really try and target Tatis Jr. and pay whatever it takes at this point to bring in a 27-year-old absolute stud with Lindor and Soto. I think that'd be a lot of fun. Now, realistically, does that happen? I'm not so sure. I think it would work out just because the Padres would save about $255 million over the next 9 years, something that, like I said before, they're looking to cut costs wherever they can, and this would be a huge cost to cut. Now, more likely, it's probably a small trade, for a guy like Ramon Laureano or a Jake Cronensworth to go play first base, or, maybe they're even trying to find a way to dump Yu Darvish's contract onto us, and I'll take it if we could pay less. We're paying just a little bit less for whatever that trade would be. Maybe they try to do something like that, but highly unlikely. Maybe they target a Nick Pivetta, a guy who was just really an innings eater on a 1 year. I don't know, but I think obviously Padres trying to trade away Machado would make more sense, but I don't think the Mets try and take on Machado in any capacity. There's been locker room issues with him in the past, and I don't think that's something the Mets are really looking to target. They're just trying to fix the locker room. I don't think adding such a big personality would fix it, but maybe adding a Tatis, someone a little younger, could help, really build the youthful culture in this locker room. We'll see what happens. And lastly, to round it out, we'll talk about the Japanese players. We have Tatsu Imai and Kazuma Okamoto. Kazuma Okamoto. There we go. I don't think we sign either of these guys. I would like Imai, the starting pitcher. He's got a lot of comps to, a Tanaka, someone that has had a lot of MLB success in the past. I just don't think the Mets shell out for Imai. I don't think Okamoto is really someone on the Mets' radar right now, but I would love Imai. The Mets need pitching. Youthful pitching would help. Any pitching would help. Tatsu Imai can't hurt, literally can't hurt. So I would love to have him on this team, but I just don't know how realistic that'll be. Now, the reason why I bring that up is because their posting date ends January 4th. That's their deadline to get signed, January 4th. So we'll probably be hearing some news about these guys pretty soon, where they're going to land and how they're going to impact their team. So just wanted to bring that up as a final little tidbit to this episode. Now, with that being said, I really do appreciate you guys coming out, listening, spending the time with me, It's always a good time talking sports, especially the Mets when they're not killing me day after day. Now, with that being said, I really do appreciate you guys coming out, listening. Take it easy and stay idiotic.